Welcome to the Afterlife podcast. I'm Samina Bari, your host. When my husband died, my world just shattered. And in the midst of my struggle with so many things, so many feelings, there were certain things that just needed to be done. And I wasn't able to do them. I just simply was a broken woman, and I needed to put one step for another, and I needed help. And for most of you who are like me, asking for help is not something you're able to do in the best of circumstances. But when your mind can't process properly, it's even more difficult because you just simply can't find the words. And that's why it's so important to surround yourself with people who love and cherish you and respect you, and who you know will be there not just in the good times, but also the worst of times. Today, I'm bringing on my friend Abby. Abby Reyes is a powerhouse communications executive here in Silicon Valley, but she's also a dear friend of mine, and she was a friend of Doug's. We met about 5 years ago, and we've been thick as thieves since then. Our husbands were very, very tight, and in fact, the night of Doug's accident, her husband was with my husband, Doug. Abby was the person who saw me first at the hospital. She picked me up from the hospital after I had said goodbye to Doug. And she was, simply put, a lifeline for me. One of the hardest things you have to confront, especially with a situation like mine, is the suddenness, the reality. And I was in shock. And it wasn't just grief, it was pure shock. But I knew I needed decisions to be made. And I knew I didn't know how. And Abby completely stepped up to the plate and took on the monumental task of organizing simply everything I needed to do. So with that, I wanted to say thank you, Abby, for joining me today.
You're so welcome. I'm so happy to be here.
Abby, let's just back up for some context. You knew Doug and me as a couple, and your husband also is very, very close with Doug. This show isn't just about me. This show is about with people supporting people like me going through this grief. What was going through your head when you found out that Doug had died just so suddenly after seeing him hours before?
Honestly, it was shock and disbelief. I didn't believe that this could have actually happened so close to us and in our own neighborhood. And I think I had said to you that night when I saw Doug at the club, he was just the most Doug he could be that night. He was just in his element. He was effervescent, and I hadn't seen him that way in a while. So I thought, oh my gosh, he's just, Doug is Dugging. I had woken up to a number of frantic texts and calls from Serena, our neighbor and friend. And I finally called her. I was actually sleeping in a separate bedroom because I snore. And I called Serena and said, what's going on? What's happening? It was 6 a.m, and she had given me the news, and I said, no, this is not true. Is there any way that this is a false narrative? When I finally talked to you, I think shock as well. All of us were shocked because we had seen how lively and just, Doug he was being that night. So to hear that he wasn't with us any longer was honestly pretty devastating. There was a lot of almost a little bit of guilt that we were with him that night, and that we didn't convince him somehow to just get in the car with us or drive him home or something like that. So there was a lot of mixture of emotion, I would say, that morning when I finally went to pick you up from the hospital. It's also fear as well, I would say, because I knew it would be devastating. I knew that you would be broken. And I didn't want to have my grief affect your grief in any way whatsoever. I wanted to kind of just give you that space to be you without interjecting any of my own personal feelings at the time for Doug's passing.
This is the first time I don't remember speaking with you. I have such fractured memories of that time. Just for our listeners and viewers, I mean, this is one of the first times I'm actually talking about this. So I haven't actually confronted those early days until this podcast. And I know Doug loved you, loved John, and, was with his friends and he was happy. And that's always given me comfort, in terms of me and in terms of your ability to be so generous in putting your emotions second. Do you think any of that has to do with perhaps a cultural background or, one of the things that I've talked about in my book is that what I've witnessed just through my experience is generally, and it doesn't apply broadly. There is some sort of a discomfort with death among most people. And I know, your background is Filipina, and I recognize that there are certain cultures that have more respect and an openness and kind of a way of easing people into the afterlife. Do you think part of your cultural background played any role in your ability to just take your emotions, table them for a moment and focus on mine?
Yeah, 100%. Personally and culturally. So death is a big part of Filipino culture. It's sad, but it's also celebrated. And funnily enough, my family business in the Philippines is funeral homes. So growing up, death was kind of a normal part of life. I obviously it's a normal part of life, but like it wasn't something that we felt uncomfortable about. And so when I saw you, yeah, I've personally had a lot of death in my life. Lots of very close family members, one of my best friends. And so I knew that every person deals with grief very differently, and there's no right or wrong. And so whatever they're feeling in that moment is what they need to feel in that moment. And again, just experiencing the death the way that I have in my own personal life, I kind of do that. And it was important for me to give you space to feel what you needed to feel because it's already heavy. Everyone's going to be feeling their own emotions, and it's a lot of energy, and you're dealing with your own grief. And so you don't want to put that, at least in my experience, like I wouldn't want to put what I was feeling on you. I can hold it on my own for the time being. But yeah, I would say culturally, we, very much celebrate death in a lot of different ways. We also, for example, we don't necessarily, in my family at least, like we don't necessarily wear black to a funeral. We would want to wear something that celebrates the person who has passed. For my cousin who was 26 when she passed, we wore white to celebrate her. And it's just like very different ways of accepting death. And I think that definitely kind of played into how I approached Doug's passing with you.
You raise a really good point. One of the things that, will be in my heart forever and ever is, you honored Doug in a way that he would want to be honored. And you handled the entire memorial for Doug. I was not involved in it. I showed up. Just tell me, how did you do that? How did you know what to do and how to just celebrate him in a way that, if he weren't with us, he would want to be there?
Yeah, your husband more than I do, but your husband was just such a bigger than life personality. And it was definitely a life cut short. And I wanted to make sure that we focused on his life rather than his passing. And I think planning that memorial service was very much a byproduct of being in communications. We work in a field where crisis is kind of an everyday occurrence. And this was certainly a crisis in your life and honestly a crisis in mine. To see a family that I loved be devastated was devastating for me as well. And so I knew, okay, logistically, Samina is not in a place to deal with the logistics of things. But at least I am good at organizing things, and I know you well enough to know how you would have wanted a memorial service for Doug. And honestly, it was also probably a coping mechanism for me to focus on the logistics of things. I'm good at that, right? When you're in your kind of work mode, you're focused, it's very clear. There's a solution to your problem. You want to solve this problem now and effectively. And I think that my way of supporting you and holding you up was making this not a part of your grieving process. I wanted you to feel light so that you can carry a heavier load for your children. This was a necessity for me to do for you, but I did want to make sure that we focus on Doug's life rather than the passing. I think we had talked about not calling it a memorial service, right? We had said specifically we wanted it to be a remembrance or a celebration of life. And I think that's kind of what we did. And you were very specific about, even in your grief, you were very specific about how you wanted Doug to be remembered. And I just wanted to do my best to honor that completely and do Doug justice, because he was that larger than life personality. He lifted everybody up. He was kind of like the center of the neighborhood and of our kind of like neighborhood family. So I wanted to really just make everyone, or hope that everyone would feel that in his service.
And I think they did. Again, my recollection is so fuzzy. I don't remember being as specific. But I do remember, just for our viewers and listeners, when we talk about the discomfort with death, husband Doug had never been to a funeral other than my father's funeral. And he avoided it also, because no one wants to deal with it. But something I recall him always being very clear about was he would be watching shows. He would see things like an Irish wake, and he always said, well, that would be the right way to go. Like, why don't people just have a drink and toast and remember the good times? And so, that's really what you delivered. You delivered that. When you say organizing a celebration of life, I've been to them and I've been to other memorials. And what you did was just so extra. Like, it was, just so thoughtful. And when you think about what I'd like people to get from it, to how they can help support other people, you organized an event in our clubhouse. You had picked music. You worked with my children to pick Daddy's favorite songs. You hired a photographer to immortalize the pictures, because you knew that we weren't there in our present state. I remember, we had a military funeral because my husband was a former Marine and was devastated, obviously, to receive that folded flag. But you also did more. You had picked photos of him reproduced, and you put them on every table. And you gave everyone who was there a different type of memory, because people showed up from everywhere. People were flying in, and you made it a very memorable event for them too. It wasn't just memorable for Doug, but it was memorable for them. Like, how did you think through all of those details? And I know, yes, your background is in the events and communications, but gosh, you were so thoughtful, not just for in the moment, but also for what the enduring memories would be for my girls and me. How did you come up with all of that?
I think that's a great question. Again, I think Doug had so many facets about him that I think we wanted to honor and recognize. He had his friends with the gaming community. He had these videos that he made that no one ever saw but are amazing, of him dressing up. And it's like he was like this onion that we wanted to keep peeling back. And I think that's kind of the way that I looked at the event. I wanted people to kind of like peel back and just feel every kind of moment of Doug, even if they only knew him from one part of his life, like they only knew him from his gaming days or they only knew him from his work days. I wanted them to kind of understand he was like this worldly personality that touched so many people. And I think when we had everyone kind of come up and just talk about stories about Doug, you could just tell how deeply he's touched so many people, even if it was a brief time. And we knew that he was always kind of a big-hearted person, but I don't think you really realized that until you actually heard the stories of his friends from every facet of life sharing very publicly their personal thoughts and feelings about Doug. And because he was such a complex person, like I wanted to kind of show that aspect of him. We had his like signature cocktail, and that was really special because it was actually Olivia who told me the recipe for this slightly dirty Doug martini. And Olivia was, I think, 7 at the time. So for her to kind of like remember this recipe that he loved to make was honestly part of the healing process, in my opinion. Because yes, I kind of like quarterbacked the event, but so many people helped me pull it together. You know, Stephanie, one of your best friends, was always there. Veronica and Andre. So it was like they sang and came as well. And there's just like so many different people, Serena, all of our neighbors who kind of contributed to reminding me, oh, we should do this about Doug. We should make sure that we talk about X, Y, and Z. So it wasn't, yes, like I kind of like helped facilitate the whole thing, but it was honestly kind of a community-based memorial because everyone was volunteering memories and volunteering ideas to create this really special event for Doug. Because again, we wanted to celebrate him so much because the loss honestly was pretty, I think, great for a lot of people.
It was really thoughtful. So, some of the things that people could consider in a memorial or a celebration of life or whatever they like to do is a favorite cocktail,
Yeah.
being served and favorite music being played and photos from all different areas. But, you had the event recorded too. And, one of the things that I treasure to this day is you made a really brilliant video package for me, and it's in a book of some sort. It is snippets. It's an edited version of the entire day, which again, I am blank in because between my grief and, quite honestly, I was on tranquilizers. I don't remember, but I pull it out on the anniversary of his death and I watch it. And I know when the girls are old enough, they will want to watch it. You also involved my girls, our girls. And, Olivia, one of my twins, she drew a picture of Daddy drinking a cocktail. And you put that at the bar with his drink. She had a chance to be part of it. And both girls wanted to speak at the service. And I think they asked for flowers. I remember them being there, and in my haze, I don't remember exactly everything.
Yeah, they did. They wanted to actually give flowers to people. So we made sure that there were flowers available in the beginning of the service that they could give to the guests. And I think it was kind of like their way to welcome people to the event and let them know, this is my dad. Thank you for being here. But they were very sweet about it. And they were very specific about wanting to be the ones to kind of give these flowers to people. And I thought that was actually a really sweet and mature thing to want to do for 7-year-olds. I think they were still honestly trying to understand what grief was and is, and they're probably still understanding it now. But I thought, gosh, like how brave of them to want to participate in an event like this, despite probably feeling quite heavy and not really understanding what they're feeling at that time. So we definitely wanted to make sure that that was honored and that was present and they felt involved. And honestly, it was also a way to make it feel less heavy for them. I knew that it would be a hard day for everybody. And I thought, okay, if I can just make sure this goes as smoothly as possible and feel as light as it could possibly feel, despite how heavy it was for everyone, then I would consider it a success. I suppose if you can consider a celebration of life a success. But that was my thought process when we had the girls kind of incorporated into the event and want them to do the flowers. Like I wanted them to feel like they were part of it. They weren't just a bystander watching people cry about their father. I wanted them to kind of like participate and again, like not feel as heavy, at least for a short while.
The event was, kind of a seminal moment because it was I decided to hold it on my wedding anniversary because Doug died just before our 16th wedding anniversary. So I knew I was going to be sad that day. So, my thought was, let's all be sad on that day. And we had so many people come from so many places. And you also were kind of the hub and spoke for that too. You organized, you were like, kind of keeping track of people's travel, and you handled transportation. I believe you picked up my mother-in-law from the airport. You actually invited someone you don't know, a friend of ours who flew in from Austin to stay at the house the evening of the event. How did you even do all of this? Like you did so much.
I kept multiple spreadsheets and kept multiple text chains going to kind of help facilitate all of the organization. And again, I think like as a byproduct of being in comms, like you're focused on like logistics and getting things done and checking the boxes. And I do think that it was a way for me to kind of like manage, and my own personal emotions was keeping track of where everybody was and what everybody needed to do. And so honestly, I'm kind of blanking on it as well because I think it was just autopilot. Because I'm fighting through grief, but I'm also holding space for your grief and your children's grief and my husband's grief and our neighbor's grief. Like we are all very much kind of a familial unit in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, okay, we gotta just push through and make sure that, again, all of the boxes are ticked. So at least Samina can focus on the things that are more important to focus on. But yeah, it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was a big feat to try to organize all of these, all of the travel. But also like, I was very glad to do it. I was glad to pick up Doug's mom from the airport. Karen, this is a difficult time for her as well. So if I could have been, help her be a little bit lighter, like I was happy to do that. And so again, autopilot mode, but also it was also very much a coping mechanism for me to make sure all of these T's were crossed and I's were dotted.
And, you are a type A person. And I think, so many people want to try to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But, grief can't be fixed. No one can do that. And I think that's why so many people say or do the wrong things in the moment because, they're just lost. But you really channeled your grief and your way of trying to fix it by helping with such heavy, heavy lifts. And I think that there's such a lesson in that for others because, you went above and beyond and you went into a territory that I think so many people don't feel comfortable doing because they assume the family will want to do it. But it's a really heavy thing to process, especially, given the circumstances of the loss. Perhaps there's more time to plan and anticipate when there's an illness involved. I didn't have any warning. And I know you didn't either, but I'm just so grateful that you were able to be helpful in a way that helped you kind of maybe compartmentalize your grief. You held it together for as long as you could and channeled your energy. Part of it is also being generous, right? And this was generosity, to the nth degree. I have a vague recollection of you coming and doing my hair and getting me dressed. And I truly, when I say like I wasn't functioning, I was just a shell of myself. You even did that. I just can't thank you enough. I mean, the gratitude will be with me forever. But, you knew exactly what I needed to do, how I needed to look. You styled my hair, I think. I think I was wearing curlers. I don't even remember in those moments. And I know I have like bath bombs or some sort of aroma thing, I think just to like lift me up or you were so incredibly kind and thoughtful.
I know how you are before grief, right? You're strong. I still look up to you. And I knew that this time really broke you. And so again, it was kind of my way of like helping hold you up when I knew you couldn't hold yourself up at that time. And I know also that you would have done the same for me if the situation were reversed. I'll cry now. If the situation were reversed. And I think that was kind of like the beauty of our friendship, and is still the beauty of our friendship, is this like reciprocity that we just know we'll hold one another up. And in my family, like, we're always like, oh, blood is thicker than water or whatnot. But at the same time, living in this neighborhood and having the friends that we have, like, you guys really taught me about, like, you're really embracing your chosen family and just making that a more kind of, I guess, like, not accepted thing, but a more normalized thing to welcome in your chosen family. So I think, again, like, I look at you very much like my sister, and I'm an only child. I don't have any sisters. And so when this happened, again, I very much wanted to kind of like help hold you up. I know it's like probably duct tape in the moment. But if duct tape's all I had, duct tape's what I would use. And so again, I wasn't thinking, oh, let's be super thoughtful. I was just thinking like what I would want someone to do for me if I was so broken and sad and upset. I would just want someone to kind of like be there for me. I mean, there was many nights where we would just like sit, you and I together.
Yes. Yes. And we would just cry. And
yeah, and just cry.
And the crying is important too. Everyone holds their emotions in, because I think there's this myth that when you're supporting someone, you don't want to show your feelings because you're afraid it's going to make the grieving person sad. But honestly, you meet us where we are, and, we want you to cry with us because it reminds us how special our person was, how many lives they touched, and that there's so much sadness about the loss. And so I really treasured those moments of crying together, because otherwise I was just crying alone.
I think what I loved about you is your willingness to talk about Doug. Because again, like, as someone who's just experiencing it from not being my partner, I was very sensitive. Like, should we mention this, about Doug, or should we say this? Because I didn't want to your point, bring up more grief. But I love that you were just like, you actually actively said it. I want us to talk about Doug. I don't want it to be for him to be forgotten. I want us to, share in these moments and have the girls remember Doug by you guys talking, all of us around them talking about Doug. And so honestly, that also helped with the grief process for the people around you, because we weren't also walking on eggshells, wondering what to say. It was helpful that you guided us in saying, it's okay to talk about Doug. It's okay to kind of like remember. I want you guys to remember. I want us to talk about these memories. I want us to say, I wish he was here. So I think that helped a lot in our little friend group. I know that my husband and Serena's husband, who were with Doug that night, deal with grief also very differently. So I think it also made, as women, right, we a little bit more open with sharing how we were feeling. So at least with you and I, like, we could openly discuss, we're sad, we're upset. But I think with my husband and some of the other husbands in our neighborhood friend group, it was a little bit difficult to talk about. But again, having you say it's okay to talk about it, I think helped open the door for a lot of people who didn't know how to deal with their grief.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception. No one wants their spouse forgotten. And I think it's really important to take a cue from the person who's experienced the loss. I was really explicit with it, but I think I could speak on behalf of so many people that, we don't want them erased. We want people to know they mattered. And I think it's even more important when you have children, especially children who have experienced the loss so early in life, because of course, the thing that makes me so sad is that, they're going to grow up without a father, without knowing their father. And, I know memories up until 7 are going to fade. In fact, my one daughter, Olivia, tells me, and she's so sad. She says, sometimes I feel like I'm forgetting him. And it breaks my heart. But I think the constant talking about him makes such an important difference for them, because it helps shape their narrative also in life, that, they don't have a dad now, but they had a dad who was amazing, who made a difference in people's lives. And, it's so important to take that cue from the person who's experiencing it. I can't speak for everyone who's had a loss, but I know we don't want them erased because that's not reality. And again, it's even more important with children. And I know before Doug died, he was in the process of wanting to up-level his office. It was the room he was always in, and he had all these plans. And so I decided I was going to continue to keep it as his room. So not only did I design it the way he wanted, but we created a bit of a memorial wall. And even to this day, it serves as a source of comfort, mixed emotions, sadness and comfort to one of my daughters, Ariel. She sits in there and she just reflects and she spends time in there because it makes her feel close to her daddy. But, you helped me design that memorial wall, like gallery wall, really. Let's not call it a memorial wall. It's about good times. And, that too is a really incredibly thoughtful gesture because it keeps him alive well beyond the celebration of life, into their lives as they grow and they form more of their identities. They'll never forget that he was part of their identity.
A lot of the things that I did during that time, honestly, Samina, were kind of motivated by the twins. I just wanted to do them justice, or do Doug justice, so that they remember him and they know him, even though they only had 7 years with him. And so, like, the memorial video that I had edited that we showed during the service, I honestly cried. The music was very personal. There's songs that Doug loved, there's songs that the girls loved, there's songs that you loved. It was like his life in a finite amount of time, video time. But I wanted them to feel like if they were to watch this in 10 years, that they would know their dad and how cool their dad was. And same goes for that room. I remember you actually kept that room shut for a while, the door to that
I
room
did.
shut for a while.
I couldn't deal
And
with
when
it.
you called me and said, I want to do Doug's room, I thought, this is amazing. This is a big moment. So I think that's why there was, again, a lot of like love and care. I wanted the twins to feel like not afraid of that room. I wanted them to feel like they knew their dad and they could talk, they could ask questions about what's this on the wall? What does this mean? Or what is this tiki cup or glass mean? Because there's so many quirky things. I wanted it to be displayed in a way that they could have a conversation about it. So I think when we kind of like went through the room, we're like, okay, well, let's put this on the wall. Let's have these on the shelves. We want this red chair over here. And it is a very cool vibe room. It's not a room that anyone feels uncomfortable sitting in. I think people, again, like who come to the house and see the house, they're like, oh my gosh, this is such a cool room. And I love that. I love that for you. I love that for the girls. I love that Olivia and Ariel both sit in there. It's not surprising to me that Ariel sits in there and reflects on things because she's a very reflective child. And,
Yeah.
I love that she can make the space in her heart and her mind to sit in that room. So again, I'm glad that that room is there. And you also, like, I can't take all the credit. You are very thoughtful in how you wanted to display Doug's memory. And, even like framing his chef's jacket, I thought was just so special with stains and all. Like, it's just, you almost could still smell his cooking or feel him in the room. And I think I had asked you once, like, are you uncomfortable being in the house? Because obviously there's so many memories of Doug in the house. And you were very quick to say, no, this was our dream home. I want us to remember Doug here. And I thought, okay, you know what? That's a very like special feeling. To be fair, like I was like, I'm kind of always like creeped out about ghost stories and whatnot.
I know.
And my husband thinks I'm crazy for it. And it's just like I don't know what it's about. But I remember feeling there are a few nights where I'd walked home from your place after crying with you about Doug. And if anyone knows about where we live, it gets quite foggy at night and can be kind of creepy. And I remember one night walking back home to my house, which is just around the corner, and thinking, you know what? If Doug's around here, he wouldn't scare me. He would probably walk me home, and he wouldn't scare me because he just knew. But I never felt that energy. Again, to go back to the room, I always felt a good energy in your home. And I think that's honestly because of how you have approached it and have had the girls approach it. Like there's no fear about being in that room because it's Doug's room. It's more like we be in that room to be with Doug. So I think that that's really special. And I think a lot of people, again, who are maybe a little bit uncomfortable with death will maybe put things away and not want to look at things. And that's okay too. But I do think, there's also a place and space that you can create that isn't necessarily a memorial, but is a celebration of that person. And I think that's what you did.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I am eternally grateful to you for every single thing you did. And I think there's so many takeaways, honestly, and even just what we've been discussing today about how people can support someone who's lost their person in life. I think compartmentalizing your emotions and putting your fear aside and putting yourself in our shoes and how can you lighten our load as much as possible, as much as humanly possible is such an important one. How can you create permanent remembrances so that when the fog clears, and if there are young children involved, what can be taken forward and treasured? How do you keep that person's presence in your life alive, even though they're not with you? And of course, it depends on each relationship and the depth of the relationship and all of that. But the details count, and there's so many details when you lose your person. There's so many things that need to be taken into account. There's no shortage from organizing, transportation, housing, cocktails. Just I know that there are lots of friends who want to help, and those are just some of the ways. But I think what you did, in conjunction with so many people, was make it very special, make it very memorable, make it something that people still talk about today, and remember the person in the best way that they can be, in a light of happiness, not in a light of regret or sadness. And I think if I were to say any one thing to viewers and listeners is, cultivate that chosen family, because one day you will need them and they will need you. And I could not have gotten through any of this without you and others in my chosen family. I just simply don't know where I would be. And it's so, so important. And they say blood is thicker than water. But when people choose to love you for you, that speaks volumes. And that is a life well lived. Abby, thank you so very, very much for joining me on this episode. And again, you have my eternal gratitude and love.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for being my sister in life. So love, love, love you very much.
Thank you.